This one goes out to all of the survival preppers, doomsdayers. And really, I mean, it's come to my awareness lately, Batavia, that I think a lot of gardeners think like this. Yeah, I mean, we think like that deep down, right? About
Yeah.
survival and stuff like that. So I think preserving for when the SHTF happens, and cover your ears if you don't want to hear this one word, when the shit hits the fan. It's a weird thing to think about, wouldn't
Hmm.
you say?
Yeah, yeah. I think it's, save for a rainy day kind of thing, but
Mm-hmm.
but then again, what happens if it never rains? But then again, it's always going to rain at some point. Um and I feel like, not if I ever told you this, how my grandmother would say, you always need to have insert, right? You shouldn't have to run out to go buy X. And the dark part of that is, if memory serves me correct, it was more like, oh, if something comes up like a funeral, like you should have a nice black dress, you should have stockings,
Yeah.
back when I was wearing stockings and things, you should have shoes that you can wear. Like, but I have applied that concept of you should have it to like almost everything in my kind of living life,
Yeah.
right? And so to an extreme,
Right.
which is something we'll cover off on in here. But it absolutely is if you need it, you want to have it. And that just doesn't magically happen. What steps are you taking to make sure you have the thing?
Well, I mean, exactly. And one thing that I do need to say before we even get any deeper into this subject, I've recently kind of broached the survival gardening topic on my YouTube channel. I That's why I started gardening ultimately, and then it just kind of has progressed from there over the years. And one thing that I will say I've noticed from a lot of comments, I need to say this on that, and my channel is Sandy Bottom Homestead, if you're curious, is when we talk about survival and food, we have to understand that you're talking about surviving, not thriving. So I got a comment recently, and it was like, well, you need 2,500 calories to maintain a day. And I don't think anybody's going to be able to do that. Well, we're not talking about like you're going to lose weight. You know what I mean? It's going to
Mhm.
happen. You're not going to be sitting fat and sassy on the high cow out of your garden if everything went bad. So we need to
Yeah.
understand that. And I look at it like this, and you can correct me if you think any different. I'm thinking 1,000 calories a day,
Mhm.
1,200. You're losing a little bit of weight, but you're able to maintain some, doing aspects like that. So, how do you think about that?
Yeah. I mean, I think that it's not like there's no well balanced in this. There's no well balanced diet. You're going to be eating some of the same things over and over and over, depending on how you've prepared, right? Um, so if we wanted to put a number on it, yeah, 1,000 calories sounds about right, right? But there's also this bit of like, for how long? So I'm not one that gardens by the numbers in that way when it comes to like what I'm preserving. But when you talk about, let's say for 30 days, you've heard people talk about how much money, ideally you should have saved in case you
Oh, I don't
lose
want to
your
talk
job.
about that because I'm,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
yeah.
Well, but it's the same idea, like, how much food should you have put away? And we
Yeah.
just look at it like, I have this much meat, and forget about whatever's hitting the fan, whether or not the meat I have would still be viable. I have this much, sauce. I have this much, grains and so on. I'm not personally calculating it to say, and that will equal this number of calories, and that means that I'll be able to survive for this amount of time. I'm looking at it like I have enough right now in my home, excuse me, to survive for a period of time. And if the hits the fan, I'm going to stop then, assess, and determine how much am I eating daily to ration that out, to be quite frank.
Well,
I'm not counting calories at that point.
the redcross.org
Mhm.
recommends that you to leave your dwelling, your home base, you take 3 days worth of food. They say for at home, 2 weeks worth of food.
Mhm.
So that's
Mhm.
what, if you go by the Red Cross. And, in my experience, going through hurricanes and, we've all gone through pandemics, natural disasters, and stuff like that. And the world we live in now, 2 weeks, you're almost over prepared. Right. I
Mhm.
mean, like the longest we've gone, well, when we had Hurricane Florence in 2018, I think it was almost 3 weeks before we could get to a grocery store. So you could look at it like that. Um, so I don't look at it as calories either. I look at it pretty simple, and it's like food. Is this going
Mhm.
to fill my belly? Is this
Mhm.
going to make me not want to choke my family out because I'm hangry? You know what I mean? Because that's real talk right there. You know what I mean? And when we talk about preserving from the garden and stuff like that, there's a way to get into the garden and really start looking at it a different way. And there's all different kinds of methods that you can do this. And I understand that everybody is different no matter where you are. Like Batavia, if she was preparing, is preparing for a different thing than I am here versus somebody in California. I don't get earthquakes really. So an earthquake would be a big deal to prepare for in California, but in North Carolina, it wouldn't do me any good. So it's totally different scenarios. And the thing that's really weird about this is it's almost like, what does your imagination bring up? And that's what you decide to prepare for. Like, so people are preparing for zombie apocalypse. The chances are pretty damn slim. You can give me all the data you want, but there's not a lot of zombie apocalypse stuff going on, But at the same time, that's like worst case. When I lived in New England, we lived next to a nuclear plant.
Mhm.
Well, that was a big deal. They gave us iodine tablets and stuff for that. So we had to prepare. If that nuclear plant left and went, we would have to go and physically leave, or else we would get into the fallout. We were in the plume zone. So, everybody's preparing for something different. So as we go through this, start thinking about what you're worried about and how you will prepare your stuff for it. And just note that what Batavia and I do may not be the same as what
Mhm.
you're going to do.
Mhm. Yeah, so it was which hurricane was it with the 3 weeks?
Um, it's funny. It's all the F storms. So the next storm that's actually being brewed is an F storm, and everybody around here's butts puckered up tight. It was Fran, Floyd, and Florence. Those are the three
Lawrence.
that were like really bad in this area.
Mhm.
So
Well, I mean, it's so if you kind of look at, all right, the possibilities, no matter what the disaster is, and we haven't even talked about just kind of life happening and you having limited, maybe there's a limit to what you would normally purchase and so on. But the sheltering in place of it all,
yeah,
right? So you can't get out as easily, whether or not it's obstructions, whether or not it's safety issues. And then there's separately, well, maybe you are able to get out, but get out to where, going to the grocery stores, like what's left there, right? And then I'm sure the Red Cross has 2 weeks because I imagine that's about the amount of time that help should arrive, like the
yeah,
cavalry should arrive, right? And that could be any number of things, like whether it's again food is back in stores, food drops if there's really some real extreme. So when we think about that, and then you kind of dovetail into, hey, because I did this whole thing recently. I'm not going to spend a lot of time here when I was looking at, kind of retirement, which is decades away. And the amount, you think about, like, what you live on and how much you need, and there's a whole idea of just using a bit more of what you're preserving
right,
and less than what you're buying. That's not the in the fan scenario, but it's a pretty good exercise to determine, like, do you really have what it takes? Real quick story, one of my great aunts, she's in Texas, and this was when they didn't have power for 4 days. It was a couple of years back, And I had talked to her afterwards, and she she was talking about how her son-in-law was shocked because she was there warming up soup for them with a candle. Right,
Yeah.
so, can of soup, they had a regular manual can opener, and she rigged up a pot that was heated through a candle, and he was like, "Mama, this is good," like like, so you think about taking that next step of, all right, yeah, what's those the MMEs, what is it called when, the packaged food, like, for the soldiers and stuff? What are those
M
called?
MREs.
MREs, yeah. So we're not that's not what I have. That's when we talk about preserving, that's not what I'm doing. It's something that's a little bit more practical. But what are the ways that I'm gonna eat all of this damn tomato sauce? But
Well,
anyway, so these are the things that kind of the drippings that we want you all to think about as we walk through this, and as you think about how prepared you want to be.
so we have you just brought up a good point, and we have notes set to the side here, but I think they need to be altered a little bit based on what you just said. So we can get into that here in a
Uh,
minute, but
yeah.
we absolutely have MREs here. I mean, we've
Mhm.
got enough, so we'll just leave it at that. But that's part of our plan. If we have
Mhm.
to go and we need to take 3 days worth of food, all I got to do is grab three for each of us, and we're good. That's 2,500 calories, and
Mhm.
they are awful. I hate them, but it is what it is. So that's definitely part of it. And you said something else in that.
How do you heat it up?
Yeah. So you
Mhm.
believe it or not, when I used to work on ships, if you don't know, I used to be a marine biologist before I got tired of working for the government. It was very, very common for us to cook our foods on the engines and boats. So we would
Mhm.
take cans of soup and put them on the engine. We would take meat and wrap them up in tin foil and put it on the engine and just cook it right there. Come back a couple hours later and it was good to go. So, these are all aspects of this that you can really get going in your garden and really, in your life. And you brought up like losing a job.
Mhm. Mhm.
We did at one point we did some volunteer work and we were feeding the homeless, and we spent a lot of time with them and we would talk to the guys. It was a men's shelter, so it was the guys that we were talking to. And one thing that was very clear to me is we are all one step away from being homeless. Like the stories that were told to us were just, I lost my job, and just very small things change in these people's lives. You would think like drug addicts and stuff like that, and a lot of them weren't at all. They just had bad string of luck, and you listen to it, and you're like, man, that could happen at any point, any time. So, if you're preparing for whatever, this is also something that can kind of factor in. You fall in hard times, being you got food, and the prices food are at now, that's a big savings.
Yeah, I think the saying is something alike, and I may botch this a bit, but most people are one health crisis away
Yeah,
from like financial despair,
yeah,
right? So I mean, that's some in the fan
yeah,
when you have to drastically change the way that you eat. It's a luxury to have cans of food on the shelf when I want to eat them versus when I need to eat them, you
yeah,
know? And I look at it and say that, ironically, a lot of what I did early on was like the skill of gardening was a big driver for if it's the fan.
yeah,
So the actual ability to garden, knowing what to do, how to do it, which I think that I have checked the boxes for most things when it comes to growing. But and then it expanded to, well, to practice the act of growing, you're gonna hopefully grow food, which I have. Now, what are you gonna do with this? I was talking to a girlfriend yesterday around like, all of the food that I grow. And she's like, we were talking about people asking for things of you. And it was like, I'm surprised more people don't ask more of you. And I said, well, yeah, they do. But also, there's a way, like I have a way to use everything that I grow, with the exception of, you won't guess it, so I'll just tell you, summer squash, zucchini, and yellow squash, dude. Like, I just, you either have, you either don't grow it and don't have any, or you grow it and it doesn't do well, or you grow it, it does well, and you have way too much.
It's coming out of your
I have to
ears.
go I have to go pick some right now. And I'm
Yeah.
like, and it's the zucchini again, zucchini bread. And I don't know if I even need to eat and enjoy it that much for the amount of muffins and bread and loaves that I would be cooking with the zucchini that I have. And I, back in the day, did zoodles and all of that. But getting off topic, my yellow squash this year is delicious, but it's like, gosh, I'd have to eat it 3 times a day to
Yeah.
keep up with it, and it's not one of those
Well, if
things
you have
that.
to, you're going to be glad that you got it. You know what I'm saying?
Well, yeah, yeah, yeah. It's not one of those things that preserves well too, which ties into what we're talking about. Like,
Does it?
all of my garden doesn't necessarily make for the hitting the fan, unless it
Yeah.
hits the fan like right now, like right this moment.
Well, and that's the thing is you can only hope and pray that it happens at it sounds weird pray for it to happen, but if it were going to happen, you would hope that it would happen like right in the middle of the season. You'd be like, "Oh, we good." You know what I mean? But think about, and this is why I always say coastal North Carolina is because think
Mhm.
about all the people that know what you're going to be like, "I'm going there."
Yeah,
You know what I mean? Like
yeah.
that's a big issue.
Hmm, hmm.
So yeah, there's a lot of ways to preserve and do things like that. And you brought it up about the squash and the zucchinis and stuff like that. And it's like, well,
Hmm.
what do we preserve? You know, and I think for this conversation, what we really need to focus on is what's coming out of the garden. I know we can preserve meat and stuff like that, but
Yeah.
we're not. If you're raising meat, absolutely. But as far as like vegetable wise, there's a lot, I do think in the same breath we have to talk about calories to an extent. You have to keep that in consideration when you talk about what to preserve. But I think we should go through a couple things that are about what to preserve and then best ways to preserve at the same time for each one. But before we do that, we're a little late, but I just want to say welcome to the Backyard Gardens podcast, everybody. If you want to support us, do so. You can get the Planter app. They are a longtime sponsor of the show for good reason. There's a link below that'll get you a discount. Buy some seeds from us, all that good stuff, or become a subscriber on Apple or Patreon. We would love to have you there, and without you, there is no show. So come check us out on YouTube as well. This is a new video, and I actually have a new backdrop now, so come check that out if you're curious. All right. So if you were worried, and again, we both started this because we were concerned. What would you preserve, Batavia? What would you focus on? Because, well, let me take it back one step. Would you change the way you garden now if you were considering something coming in the future?
Oh, that is such a great question. Dang it. All right. So
You hate
if
it when I
we're
do
really
that.
looking at, yeah, in the fan and looking at my area, I think I did the calculation. It's something like 65 ish by 25 ish. Like, that's the growing space. And obviously, if I was planning for it in the fan, there are a couple of more spots that I could, like, kind of plot in something to grow. Would I change it? Like, I had the magic wand, but I am living where I live. Yes, I would. I would change what I'm growing pretty drastically.
What would you change?
So I would, oh, this is going to pain me to say,
Yeah.
Leonard, edit this out.
Don't you touch it, Leonard.
So I would grow far fewer tomatoes, far fewer, like your summer staples, far fewer tomatoes, far fewer peppers, far fewer uh, cucumbers. Probably wouldn't grow eggplant at all. I would spend, are you ready for what I would, just as one example?
Sure.
I would spend much more of my summer garden on things like winter squash. Things that I have to do nearly zero work for, but it absolutely will sit somewhere in my home and be ready for me when I'm ready to eat it.
Yeah.
Now, again, we haven't got to the point of like, am I, peeling the winter squash and heating it up with a candle? Maybe so,
Yeah.
but I absolutely would. That's one example of what I would grow more of, and probably one of the top examples because it is something that I have to do so little with.
Yeah, I would change. I mean, I would obviously, and I've said this before. Like, if you ever go to my YouTube channel and you're a regular watcher, and you all of a sudden start to see garden beds popping up in the front,
Mhm,
that means, you know, I said it in a recent video. Like, if you see that, because I'm not just going to come out and say it. I don't want to be the fear
mhm,
mongering guy. But if you see that, you know that like Ben's got concerns. You
mhm,
know what I
mhm,
mean?
mhm,
So I would expand, but
mhm.
honestly, I don't think I would change too terribly much. The expansion would be the change. I think I
Mhm.
would focus more on preserving vegetables, stuff like that. You know, um, I would do more corn.
Mm.
I think in a time like that, in a high stress time, variety is king, because it's like, all right, we're going to eat green beans again tonight. Okay. It's like how many summer squash can you eat at once? You know what I mean? And it's like getting that variety in can really boost your morale and help you.
Yeah.
And that's something that I would really want to focus on as well. But
I'm wondering if we should put some parameters around it or kind of leave it a little bit loose because variety is king if this is a long-term situation.
yeah,
If you think about 2 weeks, if you think about, let's say I'm planning for, because I have some secret, decoder ring, and I know that she's gonna hit the fan next year this time. So I am planning for my garden this year in preparation for that. What am I growing? And there's almost an uncomfortable excitement about like just the exercise of going through that. Um, Storage crops, root crops, they would be king in my
yeah,
garden. They,
absolutely.
I would
So
probably
what are you?
do
But when you're talking about storage and root crops, let's just break that down on what you would consider that real quick.
so there is the winter squash of it all that needs no like intervention. It just sits on a shelf somewhere. But there are the onions, which again, I'm not eating an onion like an apple. But if I am having access to cook something, I do want to add those. There are the carrots, there are the turnips, there are the rutabagas, there are the parsnips, there's
Sweet
the
potatoes,
sweet potatoes, there's the white
king.
potatoes, there are all of those things. Like I would be watching and waiting for stuff to grow for months because
Yeah,
that's, these are also the things that you don't have to pick immediately as well. If you think about again, and like the high stress of it all, there's a whole conversation in and of itself around that kind of the high maintenance versus low maintenance gardening, which again, we'll pick up somewhere, maybe on all channels, Sandy Bottom
yeah,
Homestead Garden and Backyard Gardens podcast. So there is that. That's what it would look like. I would pull back on things like tomatoes just because there is, and I would do more. I'm I kind of feel a little bit guilty about being like so amped up around the idea of like talking about the shit in the van. I would probably do so few fresh green beans and more shelling beans. You know, um, the
well,
tomatoes pulled back just based on the whole like the rigmarole you have to go through. I love tomatoes, y'all know this, but um, it's not as dependable as a crop as you think.
so this is why I wanted to change the parameter a little bit,
Mhm,
is around tomatoes. So you
mhm,
you had mentioned I got all this tomato sauce and I don't, what am I
mhm,
going to do with it? Well, this does kind of go outside of the scope of this, but let's say you are a big proponent of tomato sauce and we don't have a crystal ball. That
mhm,
doesn't
mhm,
happen. I remember when COVID was first starting, this was in January of that year. I
mhm,
remember I went on YouTube and nobody was talking about it. And this guy and I went back and saw what he originally did videos on, but he did videos on like gold, like buying gold and stuff, like
mhm,
just random. but he was a disease expert. And I remember, and excuse the term, but this is what caught my eye is, the Wu flu. That's what it was
Mm,
called at first. And he was
mhm.
talking about this thing over there that was going crazy. I started watching it one night, and every night he was doing live streams. And I was like, I told my wife, I was like, we need to pay attention to this. And they were starting to put graphs up and everything. And I saw that there was like 50,000 infections in one day, and then he would like really explain how it grew and exponential gain and stuff like that. And I told her, and I was like, I think we need at this point we need to get very serious about this. And of course it's
Mhm.
the worst time of year for something. It's February,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
so I was like, and luckily we had stuff, but I was like, we have a medical tote, and I was like, pull out medical tote, see what we have in it. And we had hand sanitizer and masks in it, so we were good basically. But that was like just something that kind of set off in my head, is like, watch this, and next thing you
Mm,
know, we're all locked down, which was mind blown. But if
yeah.
we go into that and you say, well, you don't have a crystal ball, um, man, what was I talking before I did that?
The reason why I was pulling back on
Oh
tomatoes and
yeah.
the sauce of it all.
So it's like if you're really big into it, and it's like right now everything goes crazy. Well, you can take steps beforehand. Batavia, we all know she's got like 200 bottles or cans of tomato sauce. We know this, and we all know too. You and I both, listener, gardener, we know that they are all 4 or 5 years old, and she's still eating them. So how can we?
And will.
And will. So how can we ensure that Batavia doesn't have to just crack the top to the can and drink it when she's desperate? Start buying pasta and storing it.
Mhm.
Prepare for that stuff in other ways. Nobody's saying that you're going to have to live out of your garden solely, and that you can't do anything in the
Yeah,
meantime to prepare for that. And
yeah.
so, you know, pasta's really good because somebody was worried about 2,600 calories. There
Mhm,
ain't no
mhm.
faster way to get some calories and eat some damn pasta,
Yeah.
hands
Yeah,
down.
I think and I thought about the idea of whatever you have, put some sauce on it
Yeah.
and it stretches it out, right? Like I saw this on the internet. They were talking about like the way that we eat differently in different households. Spaghetti is a good example. Spaghetti with fish, like fried fish is a whole thing. Like and it's in some culture, it's probably more
Fried
so in
fish
my
goes
culture,
good with
right?
everything.
But I never grew up with spaghetti and fish. Spaghetti was the meal. You had meat, ground beef in the spaghetti. You had, I know I'm going to probably be questioned around this. Toast would go with it, so but that was the whole meal. You have a side salad and that was it. Now, as I continued to grow older, at like events, I would see like spaghetti is a side. And, like during barbecues and stuff, spaghetti would be
Were
a
y'all
side.
rich?
Hmm?
Were y'all rich?
No, not at
Because we
all.
damn sure enough didn't eat no salad. We just ate a bowl of spaghetti.
Well, that's maybe
We
one
didn't
of the
even get
reasons
no damn
why
salad.
I enjoy salad so much. Yeah, my grandmother was really huge on that. Like that was the vegetable
Yeah.
for the meal. So I said that to say, like, I can easily, like, even now when I cook spaghetti at home, most times it's just that's the meal. I eat it the same way. I may get some garlic bread because
Yeah.
but but yeah, there is an argument to be made that for sure I'm not going to survive solely on the things that I have in my garden. If I really believe that I'm preparing for that kind of in the fan, I would be making plans to live someplace else to grow more and a much more diverse garden than I have now. But that's not what I'm planning for. It definitely is like it is a percentage of the things that I would be surviving on. And yeah, pasta, I mean, the shelf life for a lot of pasta is like 2 years, right? And
And
just because
it can go
you
longer than that.
yeah, well, for sure, right? Yeah, it may be a little bit gummy, but hey, um, which again, there's so many cuts to this, right? Because it's the fresh water of it all. Like this is where you, as the audience, have to decide the levels that you want to try to prepare for. So something like pasta is only good if you can boil it, right? Do I have fresh water to boil it? Which goes back to the idea of, what am I doing for the heat? candles. But let's just be real. If the in the fan, I could use sauce with those potatoes that I have stored, right? So again, what
Yeah.
water am I using to boil those potatoes? I don't know. Do I have the potatoes already canned? I don't know. So there are ways you're going to figure it out. Don't get me
So
wrong.
let's get the elephant out of the room right now. I got to kick that billy goat out. You can live 30 days without food. You can only live 3 days without water. We're not water farmers here. So that's not what we're here to talk about is procuring water, but you have to have water. So by all stretch of the imagination, figure it out. You know what I mean? Here's a tip. We all got rain barrels, right? I mean, this is the audience we're talking to. A lot of us have rain barrels. Keep you a bottle of bleach, and then it's like a quarter teaspoon per gallon to clean it, to disinfect it so you can drink it. So there's that. If you got to boil it, start a fire. You boil it for 3 minutes, and it kills everything to eat. So we got that out of the way, but you're exactly right. And the pasta, if you want to preserve pasta, get a 5-gallon bucket. And then in that 5-gallon bucket, you put those desiccant packs, put about 3 or 4 of them in, and you can get food sealing tops and you put on them. And then they last 10 years that way. So there is ways to do that. But I think, pre-planning a little bit helps. You don't want to get caught with your pants down. You know what I mean? Like I was just telling, we went to David's new middle school yesterday, and there's a long line to get in. And I got there and I was like, I got to pee. And he's like, me too, because we've both been sick. We've had a stomach bug. And so I was looking around. I was like, we got to go in the woods. That's what guys do. And I was telling him, I was like, don't do this when you go to school. I was like, I got caught peeing in the bushes when I was a kid. I got caught with my pants down. It was so embarrassing. And it's just one of those things. It's like, don't get caught doing it. Like, figure it out. Think about it, pre-plan. And if you do have the crystal ball, go ahead and make the adjustments accordingly. And I think it also changes per season.
It changes per season, but one additional note on that is all of your eggs can't be in one basket. So you can't have the only thing you have are the potatoes. The only thing you have would be the winter squash, right? The only thing you have as far as food preservation is the things you have in your freezer, right? Like you have to kind of look at this and say, if one method fails me, I have another. Because all of this for this conversation is a backup of sorts, right? So backup A, backup B, backup C, backup D. But for sure, but it depends on the season and what we know we are getting out of our garden. I think I focused on the change to my gardening from like fruiting crop perspective based on where we are now in the season. We're just finishing up or will be finishing up summer. But like if you're coming into back to 2020, February, and we know, let's say it's going to be, God hope that we don't get here in our lifetime, but it's going to be a duplication of 2020, right? And things were, I mean, I was still able to go to the stores, but there was a lot of fear around going to
Yeah.
them, right?
Dude, the
so
first time we went to the store afterwards, I mean, we were like, disinfect, showered, like,
yeah,
it was like this whole big crazy ordeal, which now we know is like, okay, but we didn't know, we just didn't know.
I still curse Sanjay Gupta for having me wash off all of my, ketchup packets and stuff.
Yeah.
I was doing that for months, which generally speaking isn't the worst idea. But I, honestly, I never ever was concerned back then about not having enough food.
I was concerned about not getting Oreos. I thought we were going to run out. I'm serious. I ate a lot of Oreos. I gained a lot of weight because I just ate Oreos. I was like, we're going to eat triple stuffed Oreos every day.
Well, not only was I not worried about food, I was like going to all of my favorite fast food restaurants because I figured like this could be it. This
Yeah.
could be the end of them.
And it has been since. I'm thinking about how many have closed down.
To make sourdough. I didn't write the book, and I didn't lose the 40 pounds. And there's there are a few reasons why.
Well, if you think about this too, and I know this has been overstated over the years, but somebody may not have heard it. Your grocery store has 3 days of food. That's all it has. So after 3 days, what happens? Everybody loses their mind. I mean, look at the toilet paper. People are fighting over toilet paper. Look,
Mm-hmm.
there's a lot of
Mm-hmm.
ways to wipe your butt. You don't have to have toilet paper, just so you know.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Um, but the one thing too to understand is when you have a major power outage, and all of a sudden the the grocery stores lose power, right? After a certain time, that grocery store becomes a hazmat situation, which is hazardous material, where they physically have to have hazardous people come in, clean it, disinfect it, and everything. Because you got to think there's a lot of rotting food in there. Once those freezers go, it's lights out. And I mean, you and I both know, and our audience knows, that frozen food section is basically not even food. It's
Yeah.
like chemicals and stuff like that. We at one point we had bought a bunch of animal crackers, a big, huge bottle, and we were like, "Oh yeah, we'll just save them if we ever need them." Well, we forgot about them, and 5 years later we go, and I was like, "I want to see what these things taste like." Dude, it didn't even taste like food. It
Oh
tasted
wow.
like pure cardboard chemicals, and that was a really an eye opener for me. I was like, "This is what we're eating." It's just masked when it goes into our body in our mouths so that we're getting something different. And it was just shocking to me. So,
Yeah, I think while you we didn't want to spend a lot of time calculating calories, there is generally speaking the number one priority is obviously to stay alive when really hits the fan, but then also to stay healthy, right? So how healthy you are ultimately determines your
yeah.
survival. And I know that kind of teeters into like the apocalypse of it all, but everything in between, the idea of if you go back to 2020 again, there are people that were perfectly healthy that didn't survive. There are people that, who was the most vulnerable. So
Yeah.
you look at something like, what are you consuming? Is this an opportunity to be absolutely elitist around what you put into your body? Maybe not. But if you have ways to increase the viability of good food, then why not take those opportunities? Which goes back to the idea of what we're growing in our garden.
Yeah.
The potatoes that I dug up and ate, that was maybe, a week after they were dug up. I mean, y'all know I love some potatoes, but it's going to be an absolute different experience, different nutrition than the potatoes that are in that bag that who knows how many months old they are from the grocery store.
Yeah.
Um, and again, if it's grocery store potatoes or nothing, for sure I'm eating grocery store potatoes, but
I'm going
you
to get
don't have
grocery store potatoes. I'm going to turn around and grow them.
yeah, you don't have
Everybody be
absolutely.
complaining about it, being like, "Oh, they're sprayed with
Yep.
chemicals." But when I ain't got no food and I ain't got no access, guess what? Them
Mhm,
chemicals going
mhm,
right in the
mhm.
dirt.
Yeah, so there's also that's an interesting thought though. The what you're eating based on what you have, but then what you're also still doing in the garden
Well, and so that
when
was
it's hitting the fan.
what I wanted to bring up next. So first of all, we have hardly talked about preserving on this show. So
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
name
So
of
we're
this
gonna have to
show is now
retitle this.
growing for the
Yeah.
SHTF.
Yeah.
But it's my question, and I think this is something that we really need to look for an answer to, is because when I think it was back around like 2010, 2012, that Doomsday Prepper show. I bring it up all the time because I watched the hell out of it.
Hmm.
It was something to watch. But a lot of people would grow food and they would preserve only. They would never really eat out of their garden. They were planning, but they would grow it and then they'd preserve it. They grow it and then they preserve it. They grow it and then they preserve it. And they focused a lot on preserving meats as well.
Yeah.
My question to everybody, so give us a comment on what you think the answer to this should be, no matter where you're listening to this or watching, is should you, when everything goes down, should we really be super worried about preserving for the future, or should we also be focusing about eating what's fresh coming out of the garden as well, so we're not totally wiping the plan and saying, no, we're only going to go sweet potatoes now because they're going to last, and then not worry about anything else? So, like, where do you sit in that?
Again, such a unique question. So we're in the middle of planning for the next garden season. It's either hit the fan or it's on the horizon. and I need to make choices about basically what's going to come out of the garden in 60 to 90 days, right? And so in my mind, I am going to be growing fewer things fresh for fresh eating, I should say, and more things for the future. Because what now I'm going through my reserves as we speak. I'm eating through the things that I've preserved previously. And if we are looking at this to say, I don't know when the end, meaning the kind of the new beginning is going to be, you know, I want to make sure that I'm able to replenish those reserves. I think that the entire garden, 65 by 25 wouldn't be only with like kind of preservation crops or storage crops. Would I not grow any tomatoes? I probably still would,
Yeah.
but I think my eating habits would have changed so much where, well, yeah, a tomato sandwich would be delicious, but fresh bread, like all of these things, it's almost like a bare minimum way of thinking about the garden. Like, what can you consume with the bare minimum of, electricity, gas, and or like all of those things.
Yeah.
So I can eat if I needed to, I could eat a potato, sweet potato raw. A sweet potato. Remember, that's what I
I
said,
would cook
raw.
it. I wouldn't eat it raw. I'd cook it.
Yeah, I mean, it again, it all depends on, where you are in the fan, you know what I'm
Yeah.
saying? So I
Do you know
think
how to start a fire?
by that time we're preparing for worst case scenario. I think that's the way that I'd be gardening for worst case scenario.
Do you know how to start a
Oh,
fire without
no, let me add
gas?
that to the list. No, I don't.
Okay, I'm going to teach you how to start a fire so you don't have
Okay.
to worry about cooking your food anymore. Yeah, I got you, boo. These are all little things that you pick up over time and stuff like that too. But I look at it differently. So I look at it like we need to still focus on eating fresh. And we
Mhm.
have to understand, if we take it out of the situation of it's going to be, a couple weeks and we're looking long term, what we have to understand is there's going to be moments of extreme, lots of coming in, lots of harvests, and then there's going to be moments of not a lot. And we definitely need to plan for the downtimes, the off season, and you need to preserve. But I think you also, when you have the opportunity and you have stuff that's coming out fresh, it's like your opportunity to kind of build up so that you can expend that energy later, So put on a couple pounds in the season, grow a couple heads of lettuce, eat the lettuce, just because it doesn't preserve doesn't mean that you can't grow it. Just because you're not going to have it months later, but like enjoy it in the time that it has and think about that. And, we haven't talked about this in quite a while. That's why we do the seasonal eating in our house, is so
Mhm.
that we get used to eating different vegetables at different times of year. It started off as like a practice to be like, well, if everything goes bad, we're not going to eat a tomato in the winter, so we got to get used to it. And it's just kind of become a habit, and we don't even think about it anymore.
Mhm. Mhm.
So I think that we definitely need to grow and focus on fresh, and you need to find a happy balance, a happy medium.
Mhm. Yeah, I figured you would, and I can see that. I just don't know if I'd tomorrow if
Think
I'd
about
have that attitude.
this is a weird thing to bring up, but think about the idea of the first Thanksgiving.
Mm.
So
Well,
it wasn't, I know, but it wasn't in November. It was in the middle of the growing season, and they had a plentiful, bountiful harvest, and they were enjoying and they were thankful for it. And so that's what we need to look at for that is, think about it like that, where there was a lot and it was able to help them. They were celebrating the fact that they had stuff that they could eat, and because the winter was tough. I lived
mhm.
in Plymouth, Massachusetts. It's terrible in the wintertime. I don't know how they made it. I really don't. I don't know how they did it. It must have been the hardest thing ever because it was miserable up there in the wintertime.
Surely wasn't 2,500 calories a day.
No, probably 500 if they were lucky, But and we also do stuff here, like I hunt and stuff like that, so we can procure stuff that way. But there's a lot of different options.
I mentioned this. I'm pretty sure I did this scenario before, and a listener reminded me because I couldn't think of during the episode the name of the book. It's Animal Vegetable Miracle by Barbara Kingsolver. It's her life, a year of food life is like the caption of it. And I can't remember the circumstances. I think maybe it was just a party they were having, like some event they were having, and it was early in the season of like the first year that they were really trying to live off the land. And it was the what could we have to kind of honor what they were trying to do that's from the garden when so little was growing at the time. And that's you can take a snapshot of that if you think
That's so
about.
important.
Hmm?
That's so important.
Yeah. If you think about going back to a crusade, really, I think Young Ben has been on for about 2 years now, at least. The growing early,
Oh,
right? Planting early, growing early, right? The crusade, right?
yeah, I got
Um,
nervous.
yeah, yeah. I was thinking about this, and I know it sometimes comes across as, maybe a tinge of self-deprecation, but it's not. It being too hard on myself. It's maybe it is, but it's just the way that I am. So I am going to be planting in September, probably right around the time y'all hear this, in the front yard bed, which would be the third season of crops in that bed. So we started off with the broccoli, which we got like 50% of. Remember, the rest of it bolted.
Good
We
job.
went in with corn, which it's about like 75, 90 days that it was in the space, right? And then we're going to come in with a set of brassicas for the fall, transplanting them in. And you think about like, could I have gotten more in that space if I would have planted earlier? I couldn't have gotten more in that space because those are the vegetables. Could I have gotten more from the space? It's just a slight difference. Yeah, right? Going back to the broccoli, going back to how large the fall crops will be, right? So there's also a small window for like a really short crop in between the corn and the fall brassicas. So
Yeah.
there was room for that. So technically, again, I could have gotten more planted and growing. But you go back to the beginning of the season, which we're talking about fall now. We'll be talking about going into winter, but we'll be talking about, because I'm thinking about it, next year, right? The single decisions you're making going into this fall, winter, and then spring absolutely impact the rest of your growing year, right? And when I think about that, I say some spaces I do want to grow for the full year, meaning like for my full growing year, not 365 days. Other spaces, back to your point of having the balance, I don't. There's one bed in the cage baby sweet potatoes. That's the only thing that's growing there this year. The only thing. It went in, mid to late June. They will come out sometime in October, maybe even November. And that's it. That's all, but that's absolutely worth it for me. That's very different if you think about that than this first bed I'm talking about, where it had three wholly different sets of crops in it. I think that is not only is it, looking at the seasons that you're growing in, but it's also being realistic with what you want to grow and what you want to bring out of your garden.
Yeah.
And we're talking about pounds and pounds and pounds of each.
Yeah. And I mean, that's the thing too, is when a lot of people are worried about what they can get out at one time, but
Mhm,
everything is a marathon. It's a long game.
mhm,
And
mhm,
so it's like, yeah, you can get 30 ears of corn out of a 4x8 bed, but I can
mhm,
also get 28 broccoli and, 24 cabbage heads
mhm.
of cabbage. And, you can go down the list about what you can and can't get out of there. And it's,
That's another, really quickly, I'm going to interrupt you. That's another note for the tomato growing, the space that they take up compared to what else you can grow and get out of that
yeah,
space.
as we go through this, so we can do a lot about this kind of thing. If y'all want to hear more about, SHTF stuff, let us know. I think we should come back maybe and talk about the preserving aspect, because I didn't realize that it would go the direction it did.
I
But
didn't either.
I,
I knew as soon as you said maybe we should alter, I knew that we were, and that's the reason why I just kept on going, because
yeah,
I knew that we were going to,
yeah. Oh well, at least we could change the time. We can't change the intro, but
yeah.
so look, that's the deal. And look, the planner app is a great tool for this because you can download it and then you don't need internet to run it or anything like that. So, sponsor, check out the link. We do need to get to, we don't have a question. We have a very cool comment, which I thought dovetailed into this subject very well, and even better so now. So our comment comes from Jennifer.
Hey, Jennifer.
Oh man, she is on it,
I'm
ladies and
talking. I
gentlemen.
saw it on your face.
Facebook on the Backyard Gardens Community Garden. It's our Facebook group on Facebook if you'd like to join it. She says, "What an awesome feeling. My family wants kielbasa, potatoes, peppers, and onions for dinner. I have potatoes and onions in storage, and then I just went out and plucked a few peppers. And to be able to go out and just grab what I need from the garden is an awesome feeling." I mean, come on. You know what I mean? That's exactly what we're talking about here.
Nope, Jennifer. Nope. Nope.
Jennifer, you're
Nope.
going to do it. Here we go.
Nope.
There it is. It's happening.
Oh, good night. Yeah. I actually made that exact same thing. And yeah, I had literally the exact same meal and pulling the exact same things from the garden. This was like last week. It had that exact same feeling, and I have no issues that I didn't have, a pig somewhere that I got the sausage from. I'm very, very comfortable with that. Um, it's in the middle of the day, especially in my regular 9 to 5 work day, I almost never harvest during the day, like during the middle of the day, because most times it's the hotter part of the day. In the spring and in the fall, there's no, I don't have any parameters around the wind. But in the summer, I mostly try to do early in the morning or maybe even late in the evening. But if you see me, my neighbors see me walk out and pick something from the garden, it's literally to put on the plate that I'm preparing now. And it's such a satisfying feeling that ironically, again, has nothing to do with the act of preserving, but it is not losing the moment of enjoying what you have in the moment.
I think it has everything to do with the preserving.
Hmm.
She had potatoes, she had onions,
Mhm.
and then she went out and got something fresh. I mean, she had two things preserved.
Oh, I was talking about me going in the middle of the lunch
Oh,
date and
yeah, yeah,
getting,
yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
Yeah,
That has
okay.
nothing to do with preserving, but it's still that satisfaction. But yeah, that's such a good example of the peppers probably don't keep as long, but peppers are going to keep longer than tomatoes. So there's that. Just like,
If
not doing
you have
anything with them.
electricity.
Well, no, not even. Like peppers on a table will keep
Yeah.
longer, fresh longer than tomatoes. Peppers will be better than tomatoes if you refrigerate them if you have electricity, right? And if you don't, you go without the peppers,
Yeah.
you know?
But I mean, I think it's just a good example of one, the balance of preserving and fresh. I think
Mhm.
it's a great example of that. Two, how without even realizing it, it's like you're almost in that mode. You know what I mean? So it's like, look, everything's gone crazy. We still have electricity, and I've got kielbasa in the refrigerator or in the freezer. Let's just say, or whatever. Let's say you love kielbasa, you just stock up on kielbasa in the freezer. I think it's a good example of like they had that, then they can go out and then get it, and then they can go, and build their meal out from there. Because newsflash, if you don't have a kielbasa, you can still have a damn meal. They still have a hearty meal because of the
Yeah,
potatoes
so
available to them.
any other protein could sub in for that. If you're gonna go vegetarian, cabbage, if you still have those in the crisper, you could going back to the idea of the grains.
Yeah,
Cook up some rice for that. Rice and potatoes. Yep, I said it.
yeah.
Like you can make that thing work. And I think that um, there's some bits of what I use in the garden that I have to go back to the simple way of cooking. I quite literally, my lettuce is from the store now, but I was talking to, this is my same great aunt. I was talking to her about, she says, yeah, I know salads grow. I said, but it's not the way you think. I said, I was just finishing lunch and I only got to half of my salad. I had salad basin, lettuce from the grocery store, cucumbers from the garden, tomatoes from the garden. I had peppers from the garden, a few shallots from the garden, I had some salmon, right? Of course, I bought that from the store, and some peaches I picked up from the store. Again, this is the way that I roll when it comes to my salads. But that was like a full on meal for me, you know. And I look at it and say, it's it's rare that I eat every single thing from the garden in a meal or in multiple meals, but you don't have to.
No, you don't. But you had a full blown meal out of your garden, and in that time, you were able to build up. And then, I think, like in your area, though, if we go to this whole thing, it is more difficult because you do have to plan for a longer winter.
Hmm. Hmm.
Versus me, it's a little bit easier, but still, I need to plan better. I need to, I bank on being able to grow into the winter, but
Yeah.
let's say that I can't and it gets too cold, or something happens and my low tunnel gets ripped and I can't get anything else to replace it. Like, what am I going to do then? These are the things that you got to think about.
So a couple of weeks back, I was thinking about my next year brassica growing and this fall. And I was kind of limiting myself to I'm only going to grow in these spaces because these other spaces will have brassicas in them next year. And again, trying to do some level of crop rotation. And I said, I have the time though to have a lot of hardy greens,
Yeah.
which goes back to a lot of greens that will be in the garden for quite a long time going into the winter. And we won't talk about it here. You'll have to you see it over on Be Better Garden or talk about it in a future episode. Like what's more important, having more growing into the winter now or leaving space for the new growing year to grow some of those similar crops? It's a hard question to ask.
Well,
And how much is too much, right?
let me just say this. Depends on why you're growing.
Mhm.
If you
Mhm.
take the breadth of this conversation, you know the answer. If you're
Mhm.
just anything else, you know the other answer. And
Yeah.
that's a personal decision that I would be interested to see what you come to, because I mean, it sounds kind of weird. It's a little dramatic, but it's like your true colors as a gardener.
Uh-huh.
You know
Uh-huh.
what I mean? Like, it puts it right on display for you. So
At this point in your garden life though,
yeah,
right?
and
You know.
it's subject to change. I mean, the way
Mhm.
I started growing and the way I grow now is totally different. I grew for different reasons. I different techniques, all that
Mhm.
stuff
Mhm.
was different because I didn't care what was going on, what I was growing. All I cared about, and even really still do, is the fact that I can grow and I'm still growing, and that there's, if I need it, it's there. That's why I always put a percentage on what we eat out of our grocery bill from our garden, because it's a good indication of like how well we are doing with that, especially as we have moved to a more whole foods diet, meaning we're eating less and less processed foods, and it's putting more strain on the garden and myself to keep things coming out. So I think it's a good question. It's a good thing you should look for and just look into. So yeah, there you go, everybody. That's now it's growing when the hits the fan. And just before anybody leaves nasty comments, Batavia was absolutely removing a syllable in there so that it's still clean. So, you have anything else you want to add to for the wonderful people out there? This is a big
I
subject.
I feel like this conversation was like it absolutely turned into something that was much more organic, you know, because we had a couple of notes for the preservation bit,
That
but
we
we
didn't
kind of
even
left
talk
those,
about.
yeah, notes in the first couple of minutes. But the reason why I feel like it's important is because it takes some time to for this to shake out.
Yeah,
Right? Like it takes some, you know, varying scenarios and what you're doing now, what you enjoy, what, you know, what you're surviving on, like all of those bits and pieces. And to be quite frank, it takes multiple conversations around this to really get to the point where if you don't already have a full plan sewn up to get to that point.
yeah,
And so that's the reason why I think, and you didn't pull us back here, it's okay that we kind of went off here and went off there because all of these things and a bunch more that we didn't even tap into are considerations, right? And it's easy to get overwhelmed by it. But if we can take it in the bite-sized pieces of like, 30, 45 minutes here, 30, 45 minutes there,
Yeah.
I think that, we can manage it.
Well, I can tell you this: if we would have started this podcast around this subject matter,
Hmm. Hmm.
I don't think the conversations would have ever been any different, except for we would have been using terms like survive and prep
Hmm.
and stuff like
Hmm.
that. I think everything else that we've always said would always, there would be a little bit of difference in, organization of gardening and stuff like that. And we can
Yeah.
absolutely start factoring that in. But over the years, I don't think it would change the conversation at all, because the root heart of it
Yep.
is growing food.
Hmm.
I can tell you this: I don't care if you know how to preserve food, if you grow a bunch of food or a little bit of food, no matter what you grow, when that situation arises, you're already in a better place than 90% of the people around you, if not more than that. So, it's really disheartening to see what has come out of people being self-sustainable and prepared
Mm.
over the years. But that's why we're different. And no matter what, whether you are planning for the end of the world or you're not, you're already prepared to some extent. So, and that's why we do a couple things. Is that's why we learn to grow, but then we grow for change.
See ya.